There's a specific kind of quiet that terrifies a narcissist, and you may have already found it without realizing what you were holding. Not the quiet of giving up, not the quiet of having nothing left to say. This is something different. This is the silence of someone who is finally, deeply understood. And the moment an empath goes truly silent, not as a tactic, not out of exhaustion, but out of clarity, something begins to fracture in the narcissist's world. Something they cannot stop. Something they were never prepared for. If you've been in a relationship with a narcissist, romantic, familial, a friendship, a workplace dynamic, you know what it means to be the one who keeps reaching, the one who explains, the one who tries one more time, sends one more message, makes one more attempt to be understood. And for a long time, maybe you thought that was love. That persistence, that refusal to give up on someone. It felt like the right thing to do. It felt like you. What nobody told you was that your voice, your engagement, your emotional presence, that was the entire point. For them. Everything a narcissist builds, the image, the control, the cycle, runs on one fuel source, your response. It doesn't matter whether that response is admiration or argument, affection or anger. What matters is that you're still there, still reacting, still oriented toward them. Psychological research on narcissistic personality structure consistently points to what's called narcissistic supply, the external validation that regulates a narcissist's sense of self. Dr. Gabor Mate has written extensively about how individuals who lack internal emotional regulation become dependent on their environment to feel real, to feel significant, to feel stable. You weren't just a partner or a friend to this person. You were, in a very literal psychological sense, their emotional infrastructure. Your attention told them they existed. Your concern proved they mattered. Even your anger confirmed their relevance. Which is why what you're about to understand changes everything. Going silent isn't giving someone the cold shoulder, and it isn't a power move you execute to win something. That distinction matters, because empaths often resist the idea of silence because it sounds like cruelty. It sounds like withholding. And if you were raised to believe that kindness means constant availability, that love means never walking away from a hard conversation, then the idea of simply going quiet can feel almost violent. But true silence, the kind that comes from clarity rather than strategy, is not about them at all. It's the moment you stop trying to make someone understand who was never interested in understanding you. It's the moment you stop performing for an audience that was always going to rewrite the show. Trauma-informed therapists describe this shift as moving from a reactive state to a regulated one. You're no longer responding from your wound. You're responding from your center. And that is an entirely different kind of human to deal with. When that response stops coming, something happens inside the narcissist that most people never get to witness. The machine has no fuel, and what follows is not peace on their end. It's panic dressed in different clothes. First comes the pursuit. Suddenly, the person who made you feel invisible becomes intensely visible themselves. Messages appear. An unexpected call. A mutual friend reaches out just to check in. This is what's known as hoovering, the attempt to suck you back into the dynamic. It can feel flattering if you're not watching for it. It can feel like proof that they've changed. It almost never is. What it actually is desperation, because their internal world has become destabilized, and the fastest way they know to restabilize it is to get you reacting again. If the pursuit doesn't work, the next stage is often devaluation from a distance. Suddenly, you become the problem. You're cold, you're immature, you're the one who couldn't handle a real relationship. They may begin performing their recovery loudly. A new relationship, new posts, a new version of themselves that seems to materialize suspiciously fast. Carl Jung described this as the persona, the mask we present to the world. And for the narcissist, rebuilding that mask after a supply loss is urgent work. What looks like thriving is often patching. And underneath all of it, according to researchers like Dr. Craig Malkin, who has spent years studying narcissistic patterns, is something the narcissist almost never has the language to name: shame. Raw, unprocessed shame that their sense of self was never stable enough to survive on its own. Your silence doesn't just inconvenience them, it exposes them to themselves. Here's what almost nobody talks about. The moment you go silent, you will probably feel like you're doing something wrong. That guilt is not an accident. Narcissistic relationship dynamics are specifically calibrated to make the healthiest, most self-protective decisions feel like betrayal. If you were told repeatedly that you were too sensitive, that you always make everything about you, that you were lucky to be loved by someone who puts up with you, then protecting yourself will feel like proof of your worst fears about yourself. This is not a character flaw. This is a trauma response. Your nervous system learned that silence meant abandonment, that distance meant punishment, that your worth depended on staying engaged no matter the cost. You're not too sensitive. What you experienced was genuinely disorienting, and your instincts telling you to stay, to explain one more time, to not give up. Those came from a place of real love. They were just aimed at someone who couldn't receive it. Your silence is not emptiness. This is the part that changes things. When you stop pouring your energy into someone who is only ever taking, that energy doesn't disappear. It returns to you. Slowly at first. Maybe it feels like numbness before it feels like peace. But clinicians who work with empath recovery consistently describe the same progression. The quiet that follows disengagement from a narcissistic relationship eventually becomes something their clients had stopped believing was available to them. It becomes space, real space in your own mind, for your own thoughts, your own wants, your own sense of what's true. You are allowed to stop explaining yourself to someone who is never listening. You are allowed to let the silence be the answer. You are allowed to decide that your energy, your presence, your emotional depth, those are not owed to anyone who treated them as a given. Protecting yourself is not punishment. Choosing peace is not abandonment. Going silent is not losing. For an empath who has spent years in this kind of dynamic, it might actually be the first real win. The life waiting for you on the other side of all that noise is quieter than you'd expect, and so much more yours. You don't have to announce your healing. You don't have to make sure they understand what they lost. The work you do now, the therapy, the journaling, the slow rebuilding of trust in your own perceptions, none of it requires their acknowledgement to be real. One of the most profound things you can do after a relationship like this is simply to let your life speak in a language they no longer have access to. The narcissist's collapse isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's invisible. But the empath's return to themselves, that's something you get to feel from the inside. And that's where it matters most. You already survived the loudest version of this. Now comes the quiet that belongs to you.